Flying Legends, now into its second decade, is the largest gathering of piston-powered warbirds in Europe. Its reputation is now second to none, and the show is a must-see event for airshow enthusiasts around the world. The Flightline Walk gives everyone a chance to get close to dozens of historic aircraft, many of them unique. And the reenactors who patrol the flight line give people a glimpse of what the historic airfield at Duxford must have looked like in the dark days of World War II. Visitors, both young and old, pour through the gates, and the trade stalls get very busy with people browsing for all sorts of bargains. Whilst the public are enjoying themselves, the aircraft are prepared for a spectacular 3.5-hour flying display. In fact, the engineers at the fighter collection were working hard in the days before Flying Legends to make sure that every aircraft that could was able to fly at the show. One of the highlights of any Flying Legends is the amount of veterans that make an appearance. It also gives today's pilots the chance to find out more about the aircraft they fly.
You still do this on takeoff and getting the gear up?
Oh, no, because... no, we're better than that. No, we don't have to pump now, of course. It's not a pump, it's just, with the fives, it was just a lever. So
normally, everybody on takeoff, switch hands and fly like that, and everybody transformate with it, getting the gear up.
Come on, Bill, have a go. I'll shout scramble and you run in.
It also gives the veterans a chance to renew old associations with fellow crews and the aircraft they flew.
Very, very, very fond memories. Very fond memories. A beautiful airplane. You notice how small the cockpit. And you get in there and these lads leaned over and pulled the door up, and you in there? Yes, I'm in, let's go. And you felt like you were part of the airplane. Just that you're part of the airplane.
It was, wasn't it?
Yeah.
When we strapped you in, you were part of that aircraft.
Yeah.
Traditionally, it's the Spitfires that are first up at Legends.
Very agile, very agile. And the big thing is that you get in a predicament where you had to get out. You're scaring him and he's scaring you. Get away if you can. And this way it would take you home. It'd take you home.
British ground crew didn't know what to expect when the first Americans arrived.
Well, when we first met them, we expected to see cowboys, gangsters, anybody, what we'd seen on the film. I'd never met an American before. Then these chaps came along and they were superb. There was no doubt about it. Out come the cigarettes, American. We enjoyed them.
Yeah.
We enjoyed their company right the way through for 2.5 years, and they did help us out. There's no doubt about it. When these chaps were ready to go on a scramble, we was ready. We'd warm the engine up, get that ready for them. When they come running from the dispersal point or wherever they were, we'd have the parachute on the wing, or wherever they wanted it. Some liked on the wing, some didn't. They'd jump on, pull them on, strap them in, help them up here, strap them in here. I'd stand in front, they'd say contact, and away we go. But we used to wait for them to come back. And I can honestly say that after they'd left, you counted them in when they come back, and if one was missing, you never left the flights until he showed up, was dead, or it was in hospital or crashed somewhere else. You never left.
Modern-day Spitfire pilot Charlie Brown and the Historic Aircraft Collection let us put a mini-cam into their Spitfire Mark 5B to give you a pilot's eye view of what it's like to fly in the display.
Yeah, what's it like to display the Spitfire? Well, it's a fantastic airplane to display. It's very, very safe. It's ever so easy to fly, but don't tell everybody that if they want their money back. But it's a bit of a tricky to take off and a bit more tricky to land, particularly in a sort of gusty wind. But it is absolutely fantastic.
opening sequence is astounding. A symphony of Merlin and Griffon engines to stir the soul.
What sort of manoeuvres do we fly during the display? Yes, we normally fly just simple coordinated loops, rolls, nothing too strenuous, nothing that's sort of aerobatic, going to win an aerobatic competition, that's for sure, because we're trying to make it smooth, trying to preserve the energy in the aeroplane, trying to preserve the aeroplanes, because it's not the G you pull, it's the way that you pull it, nice and smooth, no hard corners, and just the aeroplane demands to be flown that way anyway.
No commentary is needed, and we make no apologies for just letting you enjoy the wonderful sounds of these classic Rolls-Royce engines. Next up was a more sedate display, a classic collection of de Havilland aircraft. A Dragon Rapide, a Dragon, and a DH-83 Foxmoth, a marvellous tribute to the pre-war days of passenger flight. These were followed by Anna Walker in the Fighter Collection's Beech Stagger Wing. The Stagger Wing was the Learjet of its day, with an opulent cabin that was like the inside of a Rolls-Royce. Back to warbirds and the first naval air power of the show, the unmistakable gull-wing shape of the Corsair. Early in the Pacific War, US Navy and Marine Corps fighter pilots found themselves outclassed by the agile and well-armed Japanese A6M0. But even then, work was underway to provide them with better aircraft. One of those better aircraft was the Vought F4U Corsair, a rugged, powerful and somewhat unforgiving aircraft that featured a distinctive inverted gull wing. The Corsair proved more than a match for the Zero, and it would also prove to be an excellent fighter bomber, serving in this role during the Korean War and in the French colonial wars in Indochina and Algeria. The Corsair saw service with the Royal Navy Fleet Air Arm and first flew from HMS Victorious in 1944 to mount an attack on the German battleship the Tirpitz. Flying Legends gave 3 pilots, Rob Millinchip, Stu Goldspink and Dave Evans, a chance to make some aviation history. They flew 3 World War I Bristol fighters in formation, a feat that probably hasn't been achieved for decades.
It's just getting the pilots, the aircraft, the weather, everything's got to come together on the day. Unfortunately, yesterday we were blessed with good conditions, so we actually got all aircraft serviceable and we did it. So it was good, it all came together. It's awesome actually to look out in a formation and see 2 other aeroplanes of the same vintage. It's definitely something special, yeah.
Flying such an old aircraft can be a real challenge for a pilot.
It's definitely 1917 technology. It's when you think it's only 14 years after the first flight of an aeroplane. Probably for that time it was quite a complex aeroplane, but in terms of controllability compared to the aircraft of today, it's quite heavy. You've got to be on top of it at all times. And it just keeps you thinking, really. Well, there's no time to relax. It's an aeroplane, I think, that I personally wouldn't have liked to have gone to war in it. It's okay flying it around in a nice, gentle fashion, but to actually evade aircraft and use it as a gun platform must have been really difficult. But obviously, that's all they knew in those days. So I just think it was quite a handful to fight with. Yeah.
We joined Dave in the cockpit of the Historic Aircraft Collections example. The 3 Bristol fighters were joined in the air by the Shuttleworth Collection's Gloucester Gladiator. Barnwell designed the Bristol F2 for the British and Colonial Aeroplane Company during the spring of 1916. The original idea was to produce a two-seater reconnaissance plane that could take over from the obsolete BE-2. However, while working on the new aircraft, Barnwell decided to make a fighter plane. The aircraft reached the Western Front in March 1917. The first few weeks were a disaster when 4 of the first 6 aircraft were immediately shot down by Manfred von Richthofen and his squadron. Once pilots learnt to use the new machine properly, its strength, speed and agility enabled it to compete with German fighter aircraft. By 1918, the Bristol F2 was the most successful fighter plane on the Western Front. Over 3,000 were built before the end of the war, and later versions of the plane remained in RAF service until 1932. Another star of the show was supplied by the Real Aeroplane Company at Brayton in Yorkshire.
We've got a Buchon, which is a Hispano 112, which is basically a 109G model but with a Merlin engine up front. It's had its permit a week ago, so it's very, very new to us, and this is its first air show. Well, it's ex-Battle of Britain. I understand it was a static road show for many years in the States with a false Benz engine nose on it. It found its way to the old Flying Machine Company, and we bought the shell off the old Flying Machine Company 6 years ago.
It was joined for its display by the Real Aeroplane Company's Hawker Hurricane.
It's been a complete rebuild. The airframe shell was done at Airframe Assemblies. We did all the systems at Breton, and the engine came from California, from Jack Hovey. But the aeroplane is virtually a brand new aeroplane. Well, Nigel Lamb did the very first flight, and after that I did the rest of the test flying. It isn't a particularly nice aeroplane on the ground. It's got quite a quirky undercarriage, as I'm sure most people are aware. So landing and taking off can be a bit of a problem. We've set fairly stringent rules off the grass and into wind. Flying it is nice, it's very heavy. It's a young man's airplane. I feel as though I've been to the gym after I've flown it. But it is a very nice flying airplane.
The Buchon compares favourably to the Hurricane.
Probably 20 mile an hour quicker. Probably manoeuvrability. The roll rate is just as nice as the Hurricane. The Hurricane's got a nice roll rate. Pitch is very heavy, much heavier than the Hurricane. Much harder work. There's no trim tabs on the elevators or rudders. So everything you physically have to overcome all the flying forces. It's been a dream for the last 6 years, really. But one of the major problems has been overcoming the bureaucracy. We've got some nice modifications on it, which you can't see. But for instance, we have disc brakes built into the wheels, which are much, much better than the original single shoe brakes that we had before. It has been remarkably good as far as its reliability is concerned. It's quite a modern airplane in a lot of ways, much more so in manufacturing technique than a Spitfire or a Hurricane.
The display by the Bucon and the Hurricane was closely followed by another classic fighter, this time a Russian Yak-3. This Pratt & Whitney powered Yak-3 UPW is based on a late war prototype which became the forerunner of the Yak-11 trainer. The aircraft was redesigned and produced at a military aircraft factory in Romania. Next, the massive Douglas Skyraider takes to the air for another unique formation flypast, with the Royal Navy Historic Flight Sea Fury and a Supermarine Seafire.
I've been flying the Seafire 17, which is a new aeroplane. It's been freshly restored. It's taken some years to restore it. Peter Wood started it in a garage in Buckinghamshire, and then Kennett Aviation bought the project and managed the finishing of all the various bits that needed doing, and did so very well. And it flew on the 9th of May 2006, which was exactly 60 years after its first flight from Westlands in Yeovil, it being a Westland-built Seafire. Seafire 17 with a Griffon 6 and a four-blade wooden propeller. It's a short block Griffon, they call it, with a carburetor, which is slightly awkward in that it grunts when you bunt the aircraft at all. But it's a delight to fly, absolute delight. It's got a lovely feel to it. It's got oodles of power. It's very light, of course. It doesn't have any of the armament or weaponry fitted, so it's sort of at least 1,000 pounds lighter than it should be at full internal fuel.
Here comes the Skyraider.
Designed as a robust multi-role attack aircraft for the US Navy, the carrier-based Skyraider was able to carry a wide variety of weapons on its numerous wing hardpoints. The Skyraider first saw combat in the Korean War, where its long loiter time and heavy load-hauling capability gave it a distinct utility advantage over the jet aircraft of the time. The sight of such a large aircraft performing aerobatic maneuvers is quite spectacular. The third aircraft in the naval formation was the Hawker Sea Fury.
The Sea Fury is a fantastic machine. It's a post-World War II single-engine fighter that fought in Korea, and it's part of the Royal Naval Historic Flight that is based down at Yeovilton to mark the heritage of all those who have served in the Fleet Air Arm, and particularly for the Fury in the Korean War. The aircraft handles beautifully in the air. It's very well harmonised and very simple to control. It really does talk to you in the air, and it's beautiful to fly. On the ground, like many of the tail draggers, it has a few vices. It's got a very powerful engine and very weighty engine, which means you have to be a little careful on the ground, making sure you can keep it straight. This operates a Centaurus, which is unique, well, fairly unique in that it has sleeve valves, which are sleeves of metal inside the cylinders that run up and down and rotate to allow fuel and air in and the exhaust out. And so that needs some special care. And because it's quite a rare engine, we obviously don't handle the aircraft perhaps as they would have done in the front line those years ago, where perhaps we fly it a lot more gently, perhaps, because we're here to display it and show it off, not to fight it now.
The Battle of Britain Memorial Flight sent 4 aircraft to the show, including a rare appearance by its DC-3 Dakota. For the 2006 display season, BBMF Hurricane LF363 is wearing a new colour scheme, representing Hurricane 1 YBW, after emerging from a major maintenance programme and repaint over the winter period. Hurricane was joined by the flight Spitfire Mark 5B. Dakota ZA947 currently wears the livery of 267 Pegasus Squadron, which flew in the transport and resupply roles in the Middle East and the Mediterranean theatres during 1943 and 44. The squadron's role included the resupply of partisans and resistance fighters behind enemy lines, either by paradrops or by landing at clandestine airstrips. The final aircraft needs no introduction, the mighty Avro Lancaster. Another Russian fighter next, in the shape of the Polikarpov I-15 bis. The Polikarpov I-15 bis, or Seagull, was a Soviet fighter aircraft that first flew in October 1933. The I-14 started as an advanced monoplane under the direction of Andrei Tupolev. He grew concerned that the design would not mature and ordered up two backup biplane designs as the I-14A and B, just to be safe. Polikarpov himself had just been released from prison in August 1932 and was handed the I-14A project. When both the I-14 and I-14A were ordered into production, Polikarpov's design became the famous I-15. Commentator at the show is Bernard Chabert.
This is such an exceptional gathering of historical aircraft that there isn't much to tell, because the aircraft speak by themselves and do the acting, and doing the commentary is just supporting the thing. And I think the responsibility of the commentator is to bring humanity into it, because one thing which always surprises me is the fact that at the time those machines were given to kids who, most of them, had never even driven a car. This was a different period. The ones who had been exposed to wild machinery maybe had driven a 125cc motorbike, and suddenly they were into a Corsair, Tiger Cat, or a Spitfire, or anything like that. And it was a kind of a cultural shock, but at the same time all this was possible because the events were dictating these kind of things, and it shows the point to which these were different times from what we live today. Today we are afraid of our shadows. They were flying this, and not flying them for a display, lightweight and well-groomed. They were flying them day in, day out, and overloaded, and by very bad weathers, and obviously some of them survived. So it's a matter of bringing back to the public a little bit of the perspective, put them back into perspective of what it was at the time.
Yet another amazing sight at Legends is two PBY Catalinas. Dutch PH PBY joined Plain Sailing's Duxford-based example. PBY Catalina was the United States Navy designation for an American and Canadian-built flying boat of the 1930s and 1940s. PB stands for Patrol Bomber, with Y being Consolidated Aircraft's manufacturer identification. Catalinas served with every branch of the US military and in the air forces and navies of many other nations, including RAF Coastal Command. Owned by the Stichting Neptune Association based at Valkenburg, PHPBY has recently returned to the Airshow circuit after a 4-year restoration and has been named Karel Doorman in honour of the famous Dutch Rear Admiral who was killed on the 28th of February 1942 in the Battle of the Java Sea. Top cover for the display was provided by the Seafire 17, making another welcome appearance. The first of the farewells at Legends was for the Grumman Tiger Cat, flying for the last time in the UK with the rest of the Grumman cats. It's destined for a new home across the Atlantic, and it will be sorely missed at Duxford.
It's a great shame. I've enjoyed flying this aeroplane for many years. It's just unique. To be doing aerobatics in an aeroplane of that size, 2 engines, that power, there's nothing quite like it.
Dave Southwood flew the Hellcat.
It's interesting because it was the next aeroplane in the Grumman genesis of fighters during World War II. So a bigger, heavier aeroplane, more powerful, faster, and considerably better roll rate as well. Like the Wildcat, it's a nice, simple aeroplane, manual for the undercarriage retraction lowering, there's no hydraulics, whereas with the Hellcat they had gone to hydraulics for the gear and for the flaps, so a more sophisticated aeroplane, but a high performance one.
Legends is a massively complex airshow with vast amounts of aircraft activity going on at the same time.
One of the things is it's a well-tried and evolved format, so it appears complex, but conceptually it's simple. That everything is done on timings, and you make critical RT calls as information, but there's no clearances from air traffic to take off on land. It relies on people listening out, making calls at the right place, and sticking to the timings. And it is carefully planned to be well coordinated.
It is. You have to think well in advance that you're not going to end up with a situation where someone can't land because the runway is blocked or they can't take off for some other reason. So I just sit down and look over it and try and time it quite tightly down to sort of 1 minute, 60 seconds. Something else will happen. And it all depends on a good briefing, so everyone understands exactly where they fit into the program and they know what's going to happen before and afterwards.
The Flying Control Committee oversees the display.
We have a small team here today of ex-display pilots. We're all retired from the military. But Legends is an international air show, and there are a lot of people taking part who are not resident at Duxford. So they're not particularly aware, until we brief them, of where the crowd line is, and the crowd line is not a straight line at Duxford, as you will know and see. Now, there are rules and regulations in place about how far away from the crowd you must stay when you're a flying participant. Because the crowd line isn't straight, we help people. We're not the fun police by any means. We're here to assist participants so that they know how close they can come or how far away they should be.
More American types next, in the shape of the North American Mustang. A saying came about in World War II that describes the Mustang well. The Mustang won't do what a Spitfire does, but it does it over Berlin. P-51s had a staggering amount of fuel capacity, and with the addition of disposable external fuel tanks, its range was upwards of 2,000 miles. If you've ever wondered what it's like to fly a formation display, sit back and enjoy the view from our mini-cam inside the cockpit of Twilight Tier. Many thanks to Nick Gray and Ed Shipley for making this happen. What follows is a unique view of the Fighter Collection's P-51C Princess Elizabeth. The aircraft is so closely associated with American air power in the Second World War, but its design specifications were driven entirely by the Royal Air Force in the form of an order from the British Purchasing Commission. If it hadn't been for the excellent performance of this fighter, it might have existed simply as an American export to England. But when it became apparent that the Mustang's performance was outstanding, the US was compelled to start using the P-51 alongside the P-38 and P-47 designs they had already committed to. The final display by Russian aircraft at the show was the Yak-50s and 52s of the Aerostars display team, who are currently the largest civilian display team in the UK. Now for a rare treat at an air show in the UK. 2 flying B-17s. Duxford-based Sally B was joined by French-based B-17 Pink Lady. In response to the Army's request for a large multi-engine bomber, the B-17 prototype, financed entirely by Boeing, went from design board to flight test in less than 12 months. The B-17 was the first Boeing military aircraft with a flight deck instead of an open cockpit, and was armed with bombs and 5 .30 caliber machine guns mounted in clear blisters. The first B-17 saw combat in 1941, when the Royal Air Force took delivery of several B-17s for high-altitude missions. As World War II intensified, the bombers needed additional armament. The B-17E, the first mass-produced flying fortress, carried 9 machine guns and a 4,000-pound bomb load. It was several tons heavier than the prototypes and bristled with armament. Its enormous tail gave improved control and stability during high-altitude bombing. Each subsequent version was more heavily armed. An evocative sight in the Duxford skies, the 2 aircraft bring back memories of a time when the skies of Cambridgeshire never ceased to throb with the drone of departing bombers heavily laden for their missions over Europe. Another chance to say goodbye to a Duxford favourite, P-47G, No Guts, No Glory, who was packed in crates a few days after the show finished for a new life in the United States. Attending this year's Flying Legends were survivors from the Doolittle raid on Tokyo, the reprisal attack by the USA following the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, where B-25 Mitchells were flown from the deck of the aircraft carrier Hornet.
Nice meeting you, sir.
Thank you very much.
They were pleased to see a late model B-25J from the Netherlands.
Peter Garbus, nice meeting you, sir.
We used to think it was noisy, but nowadays it's...
well, it's noisy as it was in your time, I think.
Peter Garbus, nice meeting you.
Do you like to have a pleasure?
Well,
yeah, you like to have some fun.
I think you don't have to know, they understand that. They understand that.
Yeah, you do. I have a book, 30 Seconds Over Tokyo, written by one of those guys. And I asked to sign the book, and when I opened the book, there was a picture in, and I said, I'm in the picture now. And that was really touching. That's good. Yeah.
And what you can say is, when we fly with this plane, it's all a good experience. You go to air shows and it's very nice. But those guys flew in it and they were shooting at them. And that's the difference, the big difference. I think they should have been very afraid, and a lot of them were shot out of the air.
Yeah.
That's a big difference. We are in peacetime now. And that's what Giel said, that the sound of freedom makes something special with this plane.
Yeah.
Because it has been in war and it is now flying in peacetime.
This aircraft is built in 1943. Is never used in a war action. It is a trainer. We trained pilots on it, and therefore we have still 2 student seats inside. The aircraft is after the war is used as a cargo airplane, and also it's been grounded for carrying any drugs from South America. And when we bought it, there's still bullet holes were there by this action. So the sheriff has put his gun
out and he shot.
And he shot on that. But after that, it has been flown as a cargo airplane, and we bought it in a bad condition. We flew it over to Holland, and we have it now for 16 years at the moment.
We joined the crew of the B-25 in the cockpit for their display. More German aircraft followed next in the shape of the Junkers Ju-52 and the Messerschmitt 108 Typhoon, or Typhoon, from Lufthansa.
The aircraft is definitely unique. It's very few remaining out of a number of almost 5,000 which have been made. And it's Junkers' most well-known heritage, standing for the important step in aviation away from the sheer adventure to regular operation. Well, it's extremely hard to restore and keep in operation such an aircraft. You can't find parts in the workshop. You have to produce everything by yourself, and it's demanding to keep such a plane in operation. Well, it takes thousands of maintenance hours first. Restoring process was in 1984 by Lufthansa Technik in Hamburg, after a long history of the aircraft when it was purchased back from Lufthansa, looking forward to their 60th anniversary. And it took almost 2 years to have it restored to pristine condition, and nowadays it's certified under European law with an air operator certificate, even under instrument flight conditions. Well, it's a living proof for their long-term reliability and competence, not only operating modern contemporary aircraft, but also something at the very other edge of aviation, which is historic, and show it to the public. That is the purpose of the Lufthansa Berlin Foundation, who is owner and operator of the ship. Well, it's the civilian scheme, which was the intention of Professor Junkers, who was born in 1859, so the story goes back so far even. And his idea, by the way, aircraft design was as his hobby first. His idea was to connect people worldwide, even over continents, in order to improve economic cooperation worldwide. And he was later on, after some ups and downs, disappropriated in 1933 because his unhidden refusal to support was done with the aircraft later. So this is the passenger aircraft scheme of Lufthansa in the 30s, luxury travel. This was the first dependable plane after the small, the tiny with 4 or 6 seats, the Junkers F-13, the first real dependable plane, and almost a number of 5,000 had been built, 4,800 something, not only in Germany, also in France and Spain. And it took services all around the world, was operated by 30 airlines, not less than 30 airlines, 25 countries. So the backbone of many, many airlines. Well, actually this one was first designed with a single engine. The center engine was a single engine on it, and they soon found out that it was not enough power to carry the intended payload. Therefore they just added the 2 other engines at the wings. That's the reason why. And of course, a multi-engine aircraft with at least 2 or even more engines is more dependable, more safe.
German theme continued with a sparkling display by Anna Walker in the Booker Jungmann.
The aircraft, in fact, is a Moran D3801. It's a license-built Moran 406 from the French Army in Switzerland. The difference is that we have a 1,000 horsepower engine in and not a 160. And this plane was rebuilt first flight 7 years ago. The guys who owned it, they wanted to sell it 2 years ago and to the States, and I said no, it's not possible that Moran is going to the States. About history in France, yes, or in Switzerland, and I tried to find the money to keep the plane in Switzerland, and yeah, we get it. It's a legend because it's the only one in the world who is still flying, and in plane like that you cannot just go to have really fun fly because it's so expensive, so it's a lot of work each time that you want to fly, to maintain the aircraft, and if you can go to air shows, it helps you to keep the plane in a flying condition. And it's I think it's flying in this place coming nearly professional now. It's like a job, but a very bad paid job because we do it in our free time.
It flew in formation with the Fighter Collection's Hawk 75, also in French Armée de l'Air markings, which had recently returned from France after a very quick engine change by Steve Hinton.
Every aircraft is different to fly, but this one we can say it's a fighter from the first generation of the Second World War fighter, so it's a bit complicated in the cockpit. You have the lever, you are a bit around the cockpit everywhere, and you have everything to handle by yourself. You have no automatic stuff in the plane, but it's handling very well on the controls. It's yeah, I don't know how to say, nice to fly, yes.
The penultimate display was another DC-3, this time from Norway. The finale at Legends is an amazing sight. More than 24 aircraft start up and taxi out for the legendary Balbo. A huge formation of warbirds making a sound not to be forgotten. The hitchhikers on the tails of the Spitfires were there to prevent any problems in the extremely gusty conditions on the Sunday of the show. In fact, the winds gusted up to 30 knots at one point, presenting a real challenge to the pilots. This year's show managed 31 aircraft in the air at the same time, a masterpiece of organisation. Flying Legends 2006 only enhanced the legendary status of this show, and credit must go to the Fighter Collection for making Herculean efforts every year to ensure visitors get an unforgettable day out.
Minuten vandaag gevlogen.